Day 770. Stephen was not impressed with the little green men in Roswell. Oh, and the man in the suit is back. It didn't take us long to get out of Texas and into New Mexico, and it took even less time for plans to be made about our destination. The first stop we just had to make, thanks to pleading from all three of my companions, was the Carlsbad Caverns. I'd never been there, as going that far underground wasn't really appealing to me in the slightest, but I knew it was inevitable when Lisa batted her eyes at me and asked in her sweetest voice if we could stop. As we pulled into the parking lot for the visitor center, I couldn't help but feel like I was back home for the first time in months. We'd been driving through the desert for a while, but to be stopping somewhere that was so beautiful was more welcome than I expected. The excitement started boiling up inside me as we walked through the parking lot, Lisa holding my hand as we walked. She and I had spent a lot of time talking as we finished driving out of Texas, and I think she wants to get married. I can't be entirely sure, and it wouldn't really make that much sense given the severe lack of people or laws that make such a thing necessary, but she did say something about a bridal magazine she spotted in a gas station we stopped at. We entered the refreshing air of the visitor center and started looking around, mostly to get some idea of where we needed to go for the caves. Before long, we had a good idea of the layout and made our way to the cave entrance, near something called the Bat Flight Amphitheater. I assumed this was only a fun name for the entrance, but I was in for a surprise. Everything seemed to be fine as we made our way down the windy ramp to the cave entrance. We took our time as it was a little slicker than expected, and Lisa was having some trouble on the incline. "Just roll down the hill like Kyle," Stephen suggested, pointing to the ball of fluff that was now rolling toward the cave. "That's not going to happen, and if you don't move away from me, I'll kick you down the hill," Lisa shot back. It wasn't much longer before we reached the cave, and we were able to explore what would turn out to be one of the most beautiful sights we've seen, maybe even since this whole adventure began. The rock formations and the lights that illuminated each one were amazing, to put it lightly, and I was so lost in the scenery that I didn't even notice Stephen was missing yet again. Normally, I spend time looking for him and yelling his name, but this time I decided to let him have his fun and pretend I hadn't noticed his absence. We spent a couple of hours exploring the cave, finally exiting in the mid-afternoon. We waited for about an hour for Stephen to come out, but he didn't show back up, and I was actually starting to get worried. When he hadn't come out after another half hour, I decided it was time to go in and look for him. Lisa and Kyle stayed outside as I worked my way back into the cave, yelling his name as I went and looking close at the formations around me in case he was hiding. It wasn't long before I heard what sounded like sobbing, and I found a small crevasse where the sound seemed to be coming from. As I peered down, I could just make out the small form of a Bigfoot statuette about 50 feet below me. "Stephen, is that you?" "Charlie, help me! I just wanted to see what was down here. I thought I could get back out, but I'm stuck. I don't want to die down here," he said between sobs. "Give me a few minutes, I need to get some rope." I tried to sound as reassuring as I could, but I wasn't sure if we even had a long enough rope to do the job. I started walking back toward the entrance, trying to remember if we had grabbed anything that would be helpful in the situation, but I was stopped by a familiar face. "Hello again, Charlie." "Cal, what's going on? I'm trying to save Stephen at the moment," I said, trying to get around him. "Here, this should help." "I only need a couple minutes," he said, handing me the rope. Taking the line from him, I leaned back against the wall and waited, knowing he was there for more than just lending a helping hand. "Since the last time we met, I've been working to figure out if the knowing ones are aware of you, and it turns out they are. I spoke to one of them, who said they're watching to see what happens. Apparently, even they are perplexed as to how you've managed to last this long on this plane, and they're using it as a kind of experiment to see what happens," he said, pulling a pipe out and lighting it up. So they're not gonna just destroy me? It seems they're more interested in how any of this is even possible, and they want to prevent future occurrences. The one I spoke to mentioned there may be a way for you to get back to your own world, but they prefer you to stay here. Your world has become kind of a mess since you slipped out, partially thanks to things you've done here echoing through. That stadium you inadvertently destroyed, for instance, echoed, and the event in your world was seen as some kind of attack. Things have really gone downhill, and you've even been captured on video phasing in and out. My best guess leads me to a rift in Alaska that you can use to get back, sealing it behind you. His gaze shifted to the cave around as he spoke, as if he was looking for something. What about Lisa and Stephen and Kyle? Would they be able to return with me? Their place is here, Charlie. No matter how alive they become, you're going to have to make a choice at some point, but there's no rush yet. If I were you, I might try checking out the Nevada desert at some point, maybe heading up the coast and taking the long way to Alaska. His eyes came back to me and narrowed. Before I could reply, he was gone. I probably stood there in silence for 15 minutes before making my way back to Stephen. I lowered the rope down and had him up within seconds, and we started making our way back. Before we left the cave, I stopped him and explained everything the man in the suit had said, including the parts I hadn't told him to that point about the first meeting. "So you're supposed to drive to Alaska and leave us?" he said, a tremble in his voice. "I'm not leaving you. We've got time to figure things out, and we don't even know what we're going to find when we get up there. Just do me a favor and let me tell Lisa and Kyle. I want to try and figure out more before I worry them." He nodded and promised not to say anything as we made our way back out of the cave. It was early evening as we emerged, and Lisa and Kyle both celebrated as we made our way to them at the top of the ramp. I thought that was the most excitement we would get for the day, until Kyle started barking fiercely as the sound of flapping wings filled the air around us. Before I knew what was happening, thousands of bats filled the air above us, and we were treated to watching them as they flew off into the night in search of food. It was an amazing way to end the day, and gave me a distraction so I didn't have to answer Lisa's question about what took so long. Sleep was hard to come by that night, and we left early the next morning on the road to Roswell. I assumed that would be a one-day stop, but we wound up staying at a campground on the outskirts of town for the remainder of the week. The first day was spent walking around and taking in the sights of what wound up being a much smaller town than I expected. We visited the Roswell Museum, which surprisingly was full of art and some cool exhibits. I thought everything would be aliens, but I guess there's more to that town than a supposedly crashed spaceship. The main city museum wasn't the only one, and we spent a lot of time visiting different historical spots and enjoying the town in general. There were, of course, several alien stops as well, but I had to laugh when Stephen got upset about the fact that the aliens weren't much more than little green men about his size. He said he expected more as we walked through the main UFO museum downtown, and he even asked if we could just go without seeing everything. When we weren't in the city, we were taking some much-needed time to rest up at the campsite. Marshmallows over the campfire, sing-alongs, and ghost stories were the tone of the week, and the mood among the group was the best it had been in a while. After some thought and reflection on what Cal had told me, I opened up to Lisa this morning and told her what happened in the cave. She took it better than I expected. As we talked about what options might be available, with the most obvious being that I wanted to stay in this world, I noticed that she's become almost entirely human at this point. Only small reminders of her previous form remain, and she isn't the only one who's changed a lot in the past few weeks. Stephen is now almost hairy and warm-blooded, and Kyle is some kind of dinosaur-dog mix. All I can think about now is what could possibly be waiting for us in Alaska, but I don't want to rush to get there either. From the way Cal talked, it might be better to not go there at all. What I do know for sure is that we have another stop to make in the next week, and I'm actually really excited for it. Ever since I was a kid, I wondered what could possibly be in the place known as Area 51. With the fact that there's now no one around to stop us, it would be a shame to not find out what's really there. Maybe Steven will get to see the aliens he was hoping for after all.